Following a weekend in which the IDF delivered sustained air attacks against Hezbollah in Lebanon, Israeli military reservists have now gathered in northern Israel in preparation for a potential ground maneuver into Lebanon. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has convened ministers from his country's security cabinet, leading to further chatter that such an incursion is imminent. Joining me now to discuss this is Congressman Mike Waltz. He serves on the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence and the House Foreign Affairs Committee. He represents the 6th Congressional District of Florida. He's the author of a new book coming out later this month, Hard Truths, Think and Lead Like a Green Beret. Congressman Mike Waltz, welcome to the program.
Good to be with you, Tony, always.
Before we get to the Middle East, let's talk about Florida. You, right there in Florida, you were in the path of the hurricane. Give us your assessment on the ground there in Florida.
Well, we had the outer winds. I'm on the East Coast. You know, it's always a dangerous time. In Florida, the biggest concern is the storm surge and how much water the storm pushes on shore. And then, as we're seeing with our brothers and sisters in the Carolinas and in Georgia, it's how slow it moves and how much water it dumps, particularly in the highlands, as we're seeing now in North Carolina. I mean, it sounds obvious, Tony, but all that water flows downhill and leaves a path of destruction in its wake. And I think we have to come together as churches, as communities, as neighbors, and help each other out. And a quick shout out to my fellow Congressman Corey Mills, who literally got on his own helicopter full of supplies and is heading north. We're going to help each other more as fellow Americans. The government can't fix everything. We've got to come together as a community. Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I was talking with some of your colleagues over the weekend who are not necessarily accustomed to these natural disasters as we are back home in Louisiana, where we have a very tight network of churches that actually jump into action before the government even gets moving. And of course, we coordinate very closely with the local government. Right. But you're absolutely right. I think we've gotten a little complacent thinking that this is all of government's role. There's a role for it. There's certain things that only government can do. But this is something all of us need to lean into. Well, and just also, as always, let's remember our first responders and our National Guards men and women. I mean, they have families at home, too, that they're leaving to fend for themselves while they put their lives on the line, literally to rescue and aid others. And I mean, that is the appropriate role for government, coming in to do what neighbors and communities can't do for themselves. But you're right. I remember Hurricane Katrina, when so many churches banded together in the wake of that in Louisiana. But us, the coastal communities, kind of have it on, I don't want to say autopilot, but they hit the hurricane button and things and supplies literally snap into place. I think some of our neighbors that are further inland aren't just naturally, it's not a criticism, aren't quite as prepared. And this one was truly devastating.
Well, I don't say that it's a good thing that we are prepared, because we have to live through it so often, but it is a good thing that we are. And we all need to be praying for our entire country and all of those affected. This is a massive, massive storm, and the effect will be years in the recovery. I want to move to the Middle East. I want to move to the president repeatedly. We've seen this last week, over the weekend, on all the TV show, the talk shows, and then again today, the president calling for a ceasefire. This is when Israel has Hezbollah on the run. Why would we tell them to stop now?
Yeah, that's the problem, Tony, is we never let Israel finish the job. And they have conducted a series of brilliant, masterful, bold, covert and overt actions that has one of the world's worst terrorist organizations and on the run and on its back foot and decapitated. And Nasrallah, by the way, the head of Hezbollah, is right there on par with Baghdadi, the head of ISIS, Osama bin Laden, the head of al-Qaeda, responsible for the deaths of hundreds of Americans, tortured, literally skinned alive a CIA station chief, William Buckley, in the 80s, bombed a hotel in Saudi Arabia that killed even more of our service members. This is on top of Beirut. So Americans truly have stake in this, aside from our morals and values with our ally Israel. Let them finish the job. However, Tony, as you've said repeatedly, and so have I, that these are tactical victories on behalf of Israel that has clearly made a decision, we're going it alone. Biden's people just try to talk us out of it, so they didn't even tell us. But the strategic victory lies in Tehran. And as long as they are flush with cash, they will help Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Houthis rebuild. It may take a matter of years now instead of months because of Israel's victory, but they've essentially bought themselves time until we deal with Tehran, and that is drying up their cash and helping the Iranian people that are seeking freedom, like Mahsa Amini, the Kurdish woman who was killed for not wearing a hijab. Until we do those two things, that essentially Israel's bought itself time. America has to step in, shift policy on Iran, go back to maximum pressure as President Trump had in place.
Well, it sounds like Prime Minister Netanyahu plans on finishing business as he sets his sights on Iran. But I want to address one thing I think is the duplicity of the Biden administration calling for a ceasefire. Isn't that what was in place with the United Nations Resolution 1701 going back to 2006, which Israel complied with, moving their military back from the border there with Lebanon, but Hezbollah had not complied primarily?
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. In the wake of the 2006 war between Hezbollah and Israel, the UN mandated a demilitarized zone in southern Lebanon that would allow Israelis to live in peace, except Israel abided by it and Hezbollah did not. The UN actually has a force there that is completely feckless, if not complicit. Yet one more issue with the UN in the Middle East. And so Israel is going to have to move Hezbollah back by force. And I tell you what, for anyone who criticizes them, ask them if this would be the equivalent of 2 to 3 million Americans pushed off of our border, getting rocketed and hit with artillery shells every day. We wouldn't stand for it. Right. Neither should the Israelis.
I want you to juxtapose the two fronts that they're fighting on, about 5 fronts right now, but I want to compare how they were forced to deal with Hamas in Gaza because America's leadership basically tied their hands behind their back. Compare that, 12 months still fighting in Gaza to the 2 weeks they basically have executed these, as you described, brilliant operations in Lebanon.
Well, I think in fairness, an objective look at the situation, Israeli intelligence was caught flat-footed, off guard, blindsided by Hamas coming out of Gaza the way it did. The reckoning still has to happen, but it was their worst failure since 9/11, or a 9/11 style failure on Israel's part. I think they've learned from that. They also learned from the 2006 war with Lebanon as it pertains to Hezbollah in the north. They clearly fully penetrated their organization, had a number of covert options in place that they pulled off masterfully. And now for them to actually go in on the ground in southern Lebanon is going to be much easier for them because Hezbollah has just been wiped out in terms of its leadership. But again, those are tactical victories. They're important ones. The strategic one is in Tehran.
Final question for you. Got about 45 seconds left. Sure. Is this the time for Israel to strike Tehran?
I think this is a moment to not only eliminate this threat off of Israel's northern border, but to also completely reset things for Lebanon, which is completely devolved into a failed third world state under Hezbollah's oppressive leadership. So I think this is a moment to reset the calculus in the Middle East, if only Israel had a partner in the White House that would put appropriate pressure on Iran, which is going to continue to pour arms and cash into these terrorist groups.
All right, Congressman Mike Waltz, we're out of time. We did not get to your book that's coming out on the 22nd of October, but here's what we're going to do. I'm going to have you come back on. We're going to talk about that in the next couple of weeks.
All right. Thanks, Tony.